The user defined functions are basically the functions that you will be writing on your own. So far, we have been using a lot of predefined function. That is, those are also user defined, but some other user, not you. Like this bar chart function, this cross tab function. Somebody has written these functions and you are just using them, correct? When you will be writing your own code, when you'll be working on your projects, essentially in the end, you will be creating a function that will take the data as an input and produce some output for you. Okay, it will give out the result for you. So user-defined functions are the ultimate way to deploy your models or produce the results. Okay. So all those functions that you see are written in the same methodology that we are going to discuss right now. Okay. Consider this simple function that we are writing. So to define a user function in Python, we use the def keyword or define keyword, def. We say define a function. So you have to choose a correct Python variable and that will be a function name. Here I'm choosing function demo. Can I choose X? Yes. Can I choose A, B, AB? Anything. I can choose any valid variable name. But it's always a good practice whenever you are creating a function, just try to name that variable with function keyword so that anybody who looks at that variable name understands that, okay, this is the function that we are dealing with. So here is a function demo. I am not putting it any arguments. I'm not giving it any arguments. It's currently not taking anything. So inside this function, I can write down a list of steps. Any number of steps that I write within the scope of the function will be inside the function. Okay. So here, this line, this line, this line, all of these lines will be executed when I will call the function. Okay. So first I have to define it, then only I can call the function. If without defining, I call the function, so it'll throw an error that I don't know what you're talking about. Function demo, what is function demo? So first I define it and then I can call the function. So when I call the function, all of these lines that I have written inside the function were executed in one go. That is the utility of functions, that you don't have to write a lot of commands again and again. If there are certain steps that are repetitive, you can combine those repetitive set of steps under one name and you can name that set of steps as one function. Okay. So when I call the function, it will execute all of these. So right now there are 5 lines. If there are 500 lines or 5 million lines, all of them will be executed the moment you call the function. It's a function that you have just created. And if you check the data type, the type of the function is function demo. All right. Now, here I'm saying the function will now take an input. So I'm saying it'll take input number. Okay. First, it'll say hello, print hello, and then it'll say print your input is whatever input you have provided. So you define the function demo 2. I'm passing the value 20. So it is saying hello, and then it is saying your input is 20. Okay. If I give 30, it'll say your input is 30. 300, your input is 300. So whatever value I'm passing, it will be taken by this variable and will be given over here and it will print. Now, here I'm calling the function using number. If I pass it a string, will it work? Yes, it will work. If I pass it a list, then will it work? Is this going to work or give me an error? It will work because I'm not doing anything illegal here. I'm just passing a value and I'm printing that value. So Python functions are basically dynamically defining the data type of the arguments. As we all know, the data type of an argument gets defined based on the value we provide. Okay. So Python function arguments also will take any value as an input. But if you're doing something illegal with it, then they will start complaining. Like for example, I'm passing hello and in my function, I defined that I need to do input number by 2. So when I'm passing a number till that point, it's okay. It'll divide by 2 and it'll run. But if I pass a string to it, then it'll throw me an error that what you're doing with that input is dividing by 2. It is not valid. So it'll accept and it'll print hello. See, it'll run. It'll do the first line, but in the second line it'll throw error. Okay. So Python inputs are basically dependent on the values that you provide. Unless and until you are doing something legal with those values, it's okay. If you are doing something illegal, then it'll throw an error. And that is the reason we make sure that whenever we are defining the arguments, we kind of give a name that is too obvious. I'm saying input number. So user will understand that, okay, I have to pass a number here. Okay. If I give input string, so user should understand that, okay, the expectation is to pass a string. If I pass a number, there may be a chance that it may throw error. So the key thing to note down is the arguments that you will define, they will take values and they can take any values. You need to make sure that you're passing correct values to the function and define the argument such that everybody else also understand what you need to pass. Okay. Now, this is one example where you can take the interactive user input. So let's say function user input. Okay. I'm not giving any argument here. I will be creating a text box. So it will say percentage matplotlib inline is once again the previous version of Python to render the charts and graphs. So here also we will be rendering a text box like this. So please enter a value got printed. Then this input function, this generates a text box like this. So you have to enter a value, let's say 45, and then hit enter. So if you hit enter, then this will be stored over here. And then I'm printing the data type before conversion. And then you can convert the data to string if you would like, or integer if you integer or float if you like, using this particular function int. By default, when you give anything in this user input text box, it gets stored as a string. So you can see if I run it again after the uncommenting, let's say 34. So 34 was a string. When I stored it into user input, it was a string. Then I converted it into an integer by using the int function. So now the user input became an integer. And after the conversion, I'm printing once again. So it is becoming an integer. Okay. And then here I'm just printing your input is user input. So how do you take a user input from the text box? Using the input function. But please keep in mind that it stores the value as strings. So if you want to convert, if you're passing a number and you wanted to convert it into an integer, then convert it using the int like this. Okay. But if you are passing a string, then no need to use this. You can just comment this. And if you are passing a string, then it will always be string before and after. Like you did not convert basically. So both these statements will give you a string. Now let us define a function with two arguments. So far we have been given one argument. Let us give it two arguments. So function addition, number one, number two. It will take two inputs and it will add and give me the result. So some value is the result. I'm seeing num1 plus num2, and the sum of num1 and num2 is some value. I'm printing it, okay, in the print statement. So there are two ways to call this function. One is called the positional call. I'm giving 4 and 5. So num1 became 4 and num2 became 5. If I pass 4 and 50, then num1 became 4 and num2 became 50. If I pass 50 comma 4, then num1 became 50 and num2 became 4. That's why the print order is different. Yeah. So this is known as positional call. So the based on the position of the values that you're passing, it will be given to the arguments. First position, first argument, second position, second argument. But the better way to call your function is based on reference. So you provide that, okay, num2 has to take 5 and num1 has to take 4. Even if I am assigning num2 first and num1 later, it does not matter. Num1 will always be 4. Like over here, I'm giving num1 as 4 and num2 as 5. Then also the output remains the same because num1 will always get 4 and num2 will always get 5 if I am specifically assigning it the value. This is known as reference call. This is a better method because now you completely control and you are not by mistake passing one value to the other argument by mistake. You are passing the value knowingly which argument got what value. Yes, and you have been using this previously also, like over here, let's say cross-tab function index is one of the arguments. So one column is the index column, other argument, you are passing another column to it. Okay, here in the bar chart, figure size is one argument, color is another argument. I could have passed this uh, based on position also without this, but then there is a chance of making mistake that whether the color will get this light blue and blue or not. It might throw you an error saying that okay, you are passing this to something else because there are many arguments in this bar chart. I see there are many arguments. So that is why we pass using argument name, like which argument is getting what input. Okay, and this is where we are giving the specific argument name and specific value that it should get. Now, if I'm calling my function, can I provide a default value? Yes. So when I'm creating the function, you can provide a default value. Let's say num1 10 and num2 20. So these are the default values. And what I'm doing, I'm doing the sum and I'm printing it. And then I'm returning the sum value. Now returning is important, or maybe, yeah, for the time being, I'll just comment this return, call this. We'll understand about return. Okay. So what we are doing here, first we are calling the function without any inputs. Still it is running. Like over here, if you call the function without any input, let's say function add, it'll cry. It'll say, okay, two arguments. When you defined me, two arguments were given, and now you are not giving me anything. So let's say if I give it one argument, so then it'll cry, okay, I need one more. Okay, so it'll ask for inputs till the time you provide all the inputs that you gave when you defined it. It'll keep asking for the inputs. Okay, but here I'm defining a default value. Even if the user does not provide it, you still run and give me the output. Can you think of one such function which you have used in your second notebook? So default values can be defined. So if you give one of the values, so it will take one of the values and the other value will be default. So here I am saying num2 will be 2. So what will be num1? 10. So by default, it will assume 10 and give you the result. If you give both of the values, then the num1 and num2 both will be overwritten. So instead of 10 and 20, now it will use 30 and 40. Okay. Now, what is this return statement? So Python function can return a value. So here I am actually doing a summation, right? So if I want the sum of two numbers, I'm passing it to a function, then I would like to store that result, not just print it. I'm here printing, but I want this 30 to be stored in a different variable. So if I wanted to store it in a different variable, I will do something like this. That function add default, the output should be stored as my sum. So if I'm running this, I will expect that my sum should contain 30, but it is not containing anything. Why? Because my function is just printing the stuff. It is not returning anything. If you want your function to return something, then you have to put down a return keyword. So return keyword is basically the last execution keyword. So if you write down any statements after return, then it will basically won't execute. Okay, return is the last statement. So return has to be the last statement, and return takes the number or the data that you are providing it and it throws back out of the function. So now if you add this keyword return some value. So some value is a variable that is present inside the function, correct? Outside the function, I cannot access it. If you try to find some value here, it will say some value is not defined. Even if I have called it, even if I have executed it, some value is a variable that is present inside the function. Similarly, like num1 and num2, I won't be able to find num1 because it is a local variable to the function. It is defined only for the scope of the function, only within the function. So what if I want to access the sum outside the function? I will have to return it. So if I say return some value, then I can catch it. So if I define it again and run, notice the difference between the current output and now. Okay. If I run it again, then you see 30 as the output. Previously, the output was not getting generated. If I run it again, you will see the output. Yeah. Output is getting generated. Here also, if I run it, the output got generated, but I stored it in my sum. So now this 70 is stored in my sum. Yes. So in order to access something that I want to return, or I have computed something within my function and I would like to return and store it somewhere, then I have to add a return statement. Yes. Then I'll be able to do like this. I'll call a function for an operation and the result I can store it in a variable. If I don't put a return statement, then the function is not returning anything. Then if I try to store something like this, then it will be null. One of the best things about Python return statements is that it can return multiple items. If you if you just remember what we discussed here, this Python function subplots was returning two items. Can you see? Figure and subplot. It was returning two items. Similarly over here, I am saying return some value as well as multiplication value. So I am doing two operations here. I am summing up the numbers and I'm multiplying the numbers. I'm storing them into respective variables, and I'm saying that let me return both of them. So you can return multiple values in a single return statement. Now there can be only one return statement inside a function. You cannot have multiple return statement. But the beauty is the return statement can return multiple values. So it can return some, like this one, and if you wanted to return more, you can just do comma and then keep returning anything that you have done. Okay. So Python function can return multiple values in one go. So here, when I'm calling this, it prints, and then it returns two values. And I can store these two values like this. If I'm returning multiple values, so some result, product result is getting stored after this. Yep. So it is producing two results. I'm storing it in the same order. First, I'm storing the sum result, and then I'm storing the product result or the multiplication result. So I'm printing the product result is this and the sum result is this.